gold, diamonds, industrial strength diamonds, and then the raw materials that power our cell phones and laptops called tin, tantalum, and tungsten, and cobalt, which is what's in electric batteries for the future of the automobile industry, the electric car. All of these products, one of the biggest sources in the world for these raw materials is the Congo. So we've had this 500-year history, Europe and America have with just this one place, Congo, where we've just taken whatever we needed, taken by absolute force, and just immiserated and impoverished and fragmented and fractured this country. You know, and all it used to be a kingdom when it was first invaded by Portugal, and then, you know, it became a colony of Belgium, first of this King Leopold, and then Belgium. And then when it became an independent state, this whole time, you know, we've just been taking what we want. And then we look at it and go, well, look at that corrupt country. Look at it. Don't they know how to govern themselves? And not realizing, like, so much of our progress, so much of our conveniences were driven by this looting of this territory, of the people and the resources of this territory for centuries. Like, it's a shocking story. And that's just one country. And, you know, is it any surprise that it's the deadliest war in the world since World War II? So if you look since the end of the Second World War, no other place in the world has had this many deaths by mortality by conflict. It's, you know, and we look at them and go, well, what's wrong with these people? And we have just, so our view is, let's turn that equation around. Let's try to demonstrate what it is that really has caused these problems and go after those core issues and see if we can change the equation. Working with the people on the ground, the heroic civil society groups, the women's groups, the anti-corruption activists, the human rights activists, the youth groups, and all these folks in Congo and throughout Africa who are trying to change the way their governments are run, trying to change the way their countries are governed. And it's, you know, it's exciting to see the hope that especially the younger generations have about altering the course of their country's trajectory. And we just want to try to figure out, well, how can we play our role on the international side to even the playing field, to give them a better chance to change the direction of their countries.
Chicago, the Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.
So to piggyback off of that and segue into another case study, I think a lot of us have been watching what's been playing out in Sudan over the last couple of weeks. And I think from what I've seen, there seems to be a lot of optimism, but also a lot of questions about what's to come. And from your perspective, could you just give us a snapshot about what is playing out there, as well as what needs to happen to keep the country from further spiraling and hopefully being on this upward trajectory?
So it's really amazing. You know, Sudan, 30 years ago, this dictator took power, this general, Omar al-Bashir, and they went around systematically just smashing all of the forms of independent political and social organizations. So the trade unions, the professional associations, the student groups, the women's associations, commercial groups, anything that was political parties, just crushed it and built a security apparatus to keep crushing it. I just literally the last week saw a proverb that it comes from a different place, comes from Mexico, and the proverb says this: they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And these people, crushed and buried, slowly, steadily regenerated, and over the course of the last 4 months, despite the security services and the military attacking them, people being arrested by the thousands, people being raped as a warning, people being beaten and tortured, killed even in the protest movement. Finally, they succeeded in overthrowing the dictator, Omar al-Bashir. Then 24 hours later, when another general had taken power, he got overthrown. And now the protests continue because there's still a military council in power. And the Sudanese protesters, thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets, are like, we're not going to be mollified by just changing the deck chair at the very top of the Titanic. We want to see system change. They call it the deep state. They use a different kind of definition of what the deep state is, but it's this kleptocracy, this rule by thieves, where the government has been hijacked by this group of people. And they're like, no, we want the whole system to be cleansed and reformed, and we're not going to leave the streets. And I think it's just incredibly inspirational. But they can't do it alone, again, because the system isn't just internal. It goes into the international financial system. So the repressive state apparatus that continues to keep the authoritarian system in place needs to be dismantled with help from the internationals. And we have a heck of a job to do, because Russia, all they want to do is make arms deals with and mineral deals with the Sudanese regime, the military council. So they're supporting the military council. China just wants to get its oil out of there because they have all these oil investments. So they are supporting them. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, they've given billions of dollars in the last week to the regime to stay in power. So it's the Sudanese protesters against the world. Like, it's crazy, and yet they're not giving up an inch. And I don't know what's going to happen. I can't just kind of give a nice wishful, hopeful dance about what the future will bring, because the forces arrayed against them are so malevolent and so willing to use extreme force to maintain the system of extraction and repression that has been their reality for decades now. And so it's really, you used to have the United States at least sometimes be willing to speak out on human rights issues, and we haven't had that in a while. And so we've got to find other ways and other allies in the international system to create solidarity networks with the Sudanese people to try to make a difference there.
I was curious as well. I think a lot of the work that I've done has tied to that post-conflict reconstruction or humanitarian aid or delivery of services through international development. And that tends to happen in the same countries where this really horrific misappropriation of resources, extraction is all happening. So what is happening with the aid industry as well, and how does that play a role in allowing these problematic regimes to continue wreaking havoc, even though the aid industry is ideally intending to improve the lives of people who are most in need and most vulnerable in these countries?
It's a real Sophie's choice. I feel like on the one hand, you have these amazing humanitarian organizations that go into places at extreme risk and are the lifeline to populations on the ground who otherwise would have no access to medicine, food, shelter, clean water, whatever the intervention is needed. But on the other hand, it's just an interesting byproduct, and nobody set out to create this system. But generally speaking, in most of these countries that are racked by crisis and conflict, for years, for decades really, these governments have basically abdicated any responsibility, any social responsibility for their own populations. The social contract is broken long, long ago. They're again, this idea of a hijacked state, a captured state. We think of government as providing social services, of building infrastructure, of promoting economic development. This is not what these governments do. That is not their objective. We talk about state failure. These are not failed states. These are just captured, hijacked states where the governing apparatus is doing something different. It's enriching its leaders, and it's creating a very efficient security service to repress any independent voice. That's the purpose of those governments. And so to the extent that the aid industry then continues to provide the assistance to keep people alive, to meet their basic needs, they're basically replacing the government in that social contract. And again, it's not their fault. It's a byproduct of a system, of an approach to governing that is completely foreign and alien to most of us who think that, that's not what government's for. So unless you deal with that, and so the crazy thing is that the international system, for the most part, you look at the UN agencies, if you look at modern diplomacy and sort of the tools of statecraft, most of our efforts do not address this core problem. We try to negotiate with the governments to get them to do something just a little less harmful to their populations. We send peacekeeping forces mostly just observing the terrible things that are happening in these conflicts. They don't really stop them. We send billions and billions of dollars of humanitarian assistance, which of course keeps people alive. I'm not advocating to stop. I'm just saying that if we don't also try to address the core problem, the cause of these conflicts, then I don't think they're going to stop. And I think we'll probably continue to have to provide these social welfare safety nets internationally for decades to come. And, if you don't ask the question and you don't say the emperor has no clothes, then, well, the billions and billions of dollars will just keep flowing there. And the humanitarian system, the international humanitarian system will continue to sort of motor on, just providing this fig leaf for non-political action. So I know that's a bleak assessment, but the great news is like you can change it. Like, not stop giving all the assistance. We've got to address the core problem. We've got to go after these kleptocracies. We've got to say, a captured state that is willing to loot its natural resources and immiserate its own people is not acceptable, and we're going to try to do something about that. We're going to try to create a serious consequence for stealing a country into oblivion. And, we have these examples of states where millions and millions of people have died, or millions and millions have been displaced as a result of these ongoing crushing emergencies, and the world just keeps responding with giving huge amounts of aid and care to the people who are just broken by these horrific conflicts. And we do almost nothing to try to stop them, except send a few diplomats and lots of peacekeepers who are not there to address to create a solution, but are just there to sort of freeze the thing in place. I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland. You couldn't have created a crazier system if we were set out to try, where we spend so much money and do so little to try to stop these things from happening.
So is there a particular champion or an example of an individual in the U.S. government or from another major donor country that you've worked with who seems to really get it, that we have this twofold problem going on and are they doing something about it?
It's amazing, where Samantha Power in her first book, the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Problem from Hell, she talks about bystanders and upstanders. The idea that, most of the time when these terrible things happen, most people are bystanders. They're like, well, it's this big problem. I don't know what I can do about it. And even people in policy positions are just like, well, if I try to do something, above and beyond the ordinary, will I lose my job? Will I get criticized? Will I make a mistake? Will things get worse because of it? So all the reasons so that you just sit back down and go, well, what, hopefully it'll blow over. But then there's the upstander, the person who says, you know what, consequences be damned. Whatever's happened is wrong. I'm going to rattle the cage. I'm going to scream from the top of the mountain. I'm going to do what I can do from the position that I'm in, whatever that position is, whether you're in or out of government. And I'm not going to stop until I see something change. And in the Trump administration currently, there's an extraordinary woman who is the number 3 person basically at the U.S. Treasury Department, a woman named Sigal, S-I-G-A-L Mandelker, really remarkable person, daughter of Holocaust survivors. In her position, she's the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Counterterrorism and Illicit Finance. Sounds like a real mouthful, but it means like for all of the sanctions programs, all of the anti-money laundering programs, which are normally used for countering terrorism, of course. They're used for countering nuclear proliferation. They're used for breaking up drug trafficking networks. Well, we said, why can't we use those same policy tools, which have actually proven fairly effective at undermining the financial bases of terrorist groups and others? Why can't we use that for human rights? Why can't we use that for countering genocide? Why can't we use that for supporting peace? And she's like, absolutely. And so what's happened over the last year and a half, and I've gotten the chance to travel with her to Africa and work very closely with her on a few things, is that the Treasury Department has been very forward-leaning in figuring out, okay, who are the people that are most profiting from some of these horrific conflicts? And how can we use the power that we have, which is significant and substantial? I mean, the U.S. Treasury Department has more power than any other entity in the world in addressing illicit finance. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year being stolen and looted out of countries, and Treasury has the capacity to act on that. And so, especially because so much of the money is stolen in U.S. dollars. And if it's done if a crime is committed in a U.S. dollar, even if it's not a U.S. person, even if it's in another